This is Chapter 3 of Tom Sawyer Abroad. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Tom Sawyer Abroad, by Mark Twain, Chapter 3. Tom Explains.
We went to sleep about 4 o'clock and woke up about 8. The professor was sitting back there at his end, looking glum. He pitched us some breakfast, but he told us not to come abaft the midship compass. That was about the middle of the boat. Well, when you are sharp set and you eat and satisfy yourself, everything looks pretty different from what it done before. It makes a body feel pretty near comfortable, even when he's up in a balloon with a genius. We got to talking together. There was one thing that kept bothering me, and by I says, "Tom, didn't we start east?" "Yes." "How fast have we been going?" "Well, you heard what the professor said when he was raging round. Sometimes, he said, we was making 50 miles an hour, sometimes 90, sometimes 100. Said that with a gale to help, he could make 300 any time, and said if he wanted the gale, and wanted blowing the right direction, he only had to go up higher or down lower to find it." "Well, then, it's just as I reckoned. The professor lied." "Why?" "Because if we was going so fast we ought to be past Illinois, oughtn't we?" "Certainly." "Well, we ain't." "What's the reason we ain't?" "I know by the color. We're right over Illinois yet, and you can see for yourself that Indiana ain't in sight." "I wonder what's the matter with you, Huck. You know by the color." "Yes, of course I do." "What's the color got to do with it?" "It's got everything to do with it. Illinois is green, Indiana's pink. You show me any pink down here if you can. No, sir, it's green." "Indiana pink? Why, what a lie!" "It ain't no lie. I've seen it on the map, and it's pink." You never see a person so aggravated and disgusted. He says, "Well, if I was such a numbskull as you, Huck Finn, I would jump over. Seen it on the map. Huck Finn, did you reckon the States was the same color out of doors as they are on the map?" "Tom Sawyer, what's a map for? Ain't it to learn you facts?" "Of course." "Well, then, how's it going to do that if it tells lies? That's what I want to know." "Shucks, you muggins, it don't tell lies." "It don't it?" "No, it don't." "All right, then. If it don't, there ain't no two states the same color. You git around that if you can, Tom Sawyer." He see I had him, and Jim see it too, and I tell you I felt pretty good, for Tom Sawyer was always a hard person to git ahead of. Jim slapped his leg and says,
"I tell you, that's smart. That's right down smart. Ain't no use, Marse Tom. He got you this time, sure."
He slapped his leg again and says,
"My land, but it was smart one."
"I never felt so good in my life, and yet I didn't know I was saying anything much till it was out. I was just mooning along, perfectly careless, and not expecting anything was going to happen, and never thinking of such a thing at all, when all of a sudden out it come. Why, it was just as much a surprise to me as it was to any of them. It was just the same way it is when a person is munching along on a hunk of corn pone and not thinking about anything, and all of a sudden bites into a diamond. Now all that he knows first off is that it's some kind of gravel he's bit into, but he don't find out it's the diamond till he gets it out and brushes off the sand and crumbs and one thing or another, and has a look at it, and then he's surprised and glad, yes, and proud too, though when you come to look the thing straight in the eye, he ain't entitled to as much credit as he would have been if he'd been hunting diamonds. You can see the difference easy if you think it over. You see, an accident that way ain't fairly as big a thing as a thing that's done a purpose. Anybody could find that diamond in that corn pone, but, mind you, it's got to be somebody that's got that kind of a corn pone. That's where that feller's credit comes in, you see, and that's where mine comes in. I don't claim no great things. I don't reckon I could have done it again, but I done it that time. That's all I claim. And I hadn't no more idea I could do such a thing, and warn't any more thinking about it or trying to than you be this minute. Why, I was just as calm, a body couldn't be any calmer, and yet all of a sudden out it come. I've often thought of that time, and I can remember just the way everything looked, same as if it was only last week. I can see it all. Beautiful rolling country with woods and fields and lakes for hundreds and hundreds of miles all round, and towns and villages scattered everywheres under us, here and there and yonder, and the professor mooning over a chart on his little table, and Tom's cap flopping in the rigging where it was hung up to dry, and one thing in particular was a bird right alongside, not 10 foot off, going our way and trying to keep up, but losing ground all the time, and a railroad train doing the same thing down there, sliding among the trees and farms and pouring out a long cloud of black smoke and now and then a little puff of white, and when the white was gone so long you had almost forgot it, you would hear a little faint toot, and that was the whistle. And we left the bird and the train both behind, way behind, and done it easy, too. But Tom he was huffy, and said me and Jim was a couple of ignorant blatherskites, and then he says, "Suppose there's a brown calf and a big brown dog, and an artist is making a picture of them. What is the main thing that artist has got to do? He has got to paint them so you can tell them apart the minute you look at them, ain't he? Of course. Well, then, do you want him to go and paint both of them brown? Certainly you don't. He paints one of them blue, and then you can't make no mistake. It's just the same with the maps. That's why they make every state a different color. It ain't to deceive you, it's to keep you from deceiving yourself." But I couldn't see no argument about that, and neither could Jim. Jim shook his head and says,
Why, Mars Tom, if you knowed what chuckleheads dem painters is, you'd wait a long time before you'd fetch one of dem in to back up a fact I's gwine to tell you. Then you can see for yourself. I see one of them painting away one day down in old Hank Wilson's back lot, and I went down to see, and he was painting dat old brindled cow wid de near horn gone. You knows de one I means. And I asked him, what's he's painting her for? And he says, when you get her painted, de picture's worth $100. Mars Tom, he could have got the cow for 15, and I told him so. Well, sah, if you'll believe me, he just shook his head, that painter did, and went on a-daubing. Bless you, Mars Tom, dey don't know nothing. Tom, he lost his temper. I notice a person most always does that's got laid out in an argument. He told us to shut up, and maybe we'd feel better. Then he see a town clock away off down yonder, and he took up the glass and looked at it, and then looked at his silver turnip, and then at the clock, and then at the turnip again, and says, "That's funny. That clock's near about an hour fast." So he put up his turnip, and then he see another clock, and took a look, and it was an hour fast, too. That puzzled him. "That's a mighty curious thing," he says. "I don't understand it." Then he took the glass and hunted up another clock, and sure enough it was an hour fast, too. Then his eyes began to spread, and his breath to come out kinder gaspy like, and he says, "Great Scott, it's the longitude!" I says, considerably scared, "Well, what's been and gone and happened now?" "Why, the thing that's happened is that this old bladder has slid over Illinois and Indiana and Ohio like nothing, and this is the east end of Pennsylvania or New York or somewheres around there." "Tom Sawyer, you don't mean it." "Yes, I do, and it's dead sure. We've covered about 15 degrees of longitude since we left St. Louis yesterday afternoon, and them clocks are right. We've come close on to 800 miles. I didn't believe it, but it made the cold streaks trickle down my back just the same. In my experience I knowed it wouldn't take much short of 2 weeks to do it down the Mississippi on a raft. Jim was working his mind and studying. Pretty soon he says, Mars Tom, did you say dem clocks is right?
"Yes, they're right."
Ain't your watch right, too?
"She's right for St. Louis, but she's an hour wrong for here."
Mars Tom, is you trying to let on dat the time ain't the same everywheres?
"No, it ain't the same everywheres by a long shot." Jim looked distressed and says,
It grieves me to hear you talk like dat, Mars Tom. I's right down ashamed to hear you talk like dat, arter the way you's been raised. Yes, sir, it'd break your Aunt Polly's heart to hear you.
Tom was astonished. He looked Jim over wondering, and didn't say nothing, and Jim went on:
"Mars Tom, who put the people out yonder in St. Louis? De Lord done it. Who put the people here whar we is? De Lord done it. Ain't they bofe his children? 'Cause dey is. Well, den, is he gwine to scriminate 'twixt 'em?"
"Scriminate? I never heard such ignorance. There ain't no discriminating about it. When he makes you and some more of his children black, and makes the rest of us white, what do you call that?" Jim see the p'int. He was stuck. He couldn't answer. Tom says, "He does discriminate, you see, when he wants to, but this case here ain't no discrimination of his, it's man's. The Lord made the day, and he made the night, but he didn't invent the hours, and he didn't distribute them around. Man did that."
"Mars Tom, is dat so? Man done it?"
"Certainly."
"Who told him he could?"
"Nobody. He never asked." Jim studied a minute, and says:
"Well, dat do beat me. I wouldn't 'a' tuck no such resk. But some people ain't scared of nothin'. Dey bangs right ahead, dey don't care what happens. So den dey's allus an hour's difference everywhere, Mars Tom?"
"An hour? No, it's 4 minutes difference for every degree of longitude, you know. 15 of 'em's an hour, 30 of 'em's 2 hours, and so on. When it's 1 o'clock Tuesday morning in England, it's 8 o'clock the night before in New York." Jim moved a little way along the locker, and you could see he was insulted. He kept shaking his head and muttering, and so I slid along to him and patted him on the leg and petted him up, and got him over the worst of his feelings, and then he says:
"Mars Tom talkin' such talk as dat. Tuesday in one place and Monday in t'other, bofe in the same day. Huck, dis ain't no place to joke, up here whar we is. 2 days in one day. How you gwine to got 2 days inter one day?
"Can't get 2 hours into 1 hour, can you? Can't get 2 niggers into 1 nigger skin, can you? Can't get 2 gallons of whiskey into 1 gallon jug, can you?
No, sah. 'Twould strain the jug.
Yes, and even den you couldn't, I don't believe. Why, looky here, Huck, s'posen the Tuesday was New Year's, now den, is you gwine to tell me it's dis year in one place and last year in t'other, bofe in the identical same minute? It's de beatin'est rubbage. I can't stand it. I can't stand to hear tell about it." Then he begun to shiver and turn gray, and Tom says: "Now, what's the matter? What's the trouble?" Jim could hardly speak, but he says:
"Mars Tom, you ain't jokin', and it's so?"
"No, I'm not, and it is so." Jim shivered again, and says:
"Den dat Monday could be de last day, and dey wouldn't be no last day in England, and de dead wouldn't be called.
"We mustn't go over dah, Mars Tom. Please get him to turn back. I wants to be All of a sudden we see something, and all jumped up and forgot everything and begun to gaze. Tom says: "Ain't that the—" He catched his breath, then says: "It is, sure as you live. It's the ocean." That made me and Jim catch our breath, too. Then we all stood petrified but happy, for none of us had ever seen an ocean, or ever expected to. Tom kept muttering: "Atlantic Ocean, Atlantic. Land, don't it sound great? And that's it, and we are looking at it. We! Why, it's just too splendid to believe." Then we see a big bank of black smoke, and when we got nearer it was a city, and a monster she was, too, with a thick fringe of ships around one edge, and we wondered if it was New York, and begun to jaw and dispute about it, and first we knowed it slid from under us and went flying behind, and here we was, out over the very ocean itself, and going like a cyclone. Then we woke up, I tell you. We made a break aft and raised a wail, and begun to beg the professor to turn back and land us, but he jerked out his pistol and motioned us back, and we went. But nobody will ever know how bad we felt. The land was gone, all but a little streak, like a snake, away off on the edge of the water, and down under us was just ocean, 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 millions of miles of it, heaving and pitching and squirming, and white sprays blowing from the wave tops, and only a few ships in sight. wallowing around and laying over, first on one side and then on t'other, and sticking their bows under and then their sterns, and before long there weren't no ships at all, and we had the sky and the whole ocean all to ourselves, and the roomiest place I ever see, and the lonesomest.
End of chapter 3.